The rusted sign creaked in the wind outside Harper's Junction. Population 300 on a good day. Marcus Rodriguez pulled his duffel bag from the passenger seat of his beat-up Honda, squinting through the drizzle at what was supposedly his inheritance. The gas station looked like it hadn't seen a customer since the Clinton administration. Peeling paint, cracked concrete, and weeds growing through every available crack painted a picture of abandonment that matched how he felt inside. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left him with a purple heart, chronic pain, and a head full of memories he couldn't shake. Now, at 47, he was starting over with nothing but this decrepit station his estranged uncle had left him. The lawyer's words echoed in his mind as he approached the front door. "There's also a dog," she had mentioned almost as an afterthought. "German Shepherd mix. Been living there alone for 2 months since your uncle passed." Marcus had nearly declined the whole inheritance on the spot. Dogs reminded him of Adja, his canine partner who hadn't made it home from Kandahar. But homelessness was creeping closer, and pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The VIDE disability checks barely covered his medications, let alone rent in any decent neighborhood. This broken-down station in the middle of nowhere might be his only shot at having a roof over his head. The front door hung askew on its hinges, and Marcus could smell motor oil and something else, something organic and earthy. His boots crunched on broken glass as he stepped inside, calling out uncertainly, "Hey there, boy. Easy now." The response came as a low rumble from the shadows behind the counter, followed by the soft patting of large paws on concrete. The dog that emerged made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Massive shoulders, intelligent amber eyes, and a coat the color of autumn leaves marked with silver around the muzzle. This wasn't just any dog. This was a working dog, and despite his obvious age, he carried himself with the dignity of a soldier. The shepherd studied Marcus for a long moment, head tilted slightly to one side. There was recognition there, not of Marcus specifically, but of what he represented. The dog's nostrils flared, taking in scents that told stories Marcus couldn't begin to imagine. Military-issued soap, fabric softener from the Vay laundry, the metallic tang of old shrapnel still lodged in his leg, and underneath it all, the familiar weight of loss that seemed to follow veterans like a shadow. Slowly, deliberately, the dog approached and sat directly in front of Marcus, offering his head for inspection. The gesture was so formal, so military in its precision, that Marcus found himself automatically reaching out to make contact. "Well, I'll be damned," Marcus whispered, running his fingers through the thick fur around the dog's neck. No collar, but there was a scar pattern along his shoulder that looked suspiciously like shrapnel damage. "You're military, aren't you, old-timer?" The dog's tail gave a single, measured thump against the floor, neither excited nor dismissive, but acknowledging. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest for the first time in months. Here was another survivor, another soul carrying invisible wounds and trying to make sense of what came next. The inheritance suddenly felt less like a burden and more like fate putting 2 broken soldiers exactly where they needed to be. Over the next 3 days, Marcus and the dog, whom he started calling Major for his distinguished bearing, began the slow process of assessment and repair. The station itself was a disaster, but the bones were solid. The underground tanks had been properly sealed, the electrical system was ancient but functional, and there was a small apartment above the main bay that would serve as living quarters. Major seemed to have appointed himself as supervisor, following Marcus around the property and occasionally stopping to stare intently at seemingly random locations. At first, Marcus attributed it to typical dog behavior, but there was something too purposeful, too focused about these moments to dismiss easily. The first incident that made Marcus pay real attention happened on Thursday morning. He was attempting to clear decades of accumulated junk from the main bay when Major suddenly went rigid. Every muscle in his body tensed like a coiled spring. The dog's attention was fixed on a section of the far wall where old calendars and promotional materials hung in tatters. His ears pricked forward, and a low whine escaped his throat, the kind of sound Marcus recognized from military working dogs who had detected something their handlers needed to know about. When Marcus approached the wall, Major pressed his nose against a particular spot and looked up expectantly. "What is it, Major? What do you smell?" Marcus began pulling down the old papers, revealing water-stained paneling underneath. The wood looked different in one section, newer somehow, as if it had been replaced or repaired more recently than the rest. When he knocked on it, the sound was hollow, distinctly different from the solid thud of the surrounding wall. Major's tail began a slow, measured wag, the first time Marcus had seen him display anything approaching excitement. Using a crowbar he'd found in the toolbox, Marcus carefully pried at the edges of the panel until it came loose with a groan of protest. Behind the false wall was a cavity about 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, and inside that cavity was a military-style footlocker that looked like it had been placed there with considerable care. The lock was old but intact, and stenciled on the front in fading white letters was a name that made Marcus's hands shake. Skate. William Bull Rodriguez, 173rd Airborne. His uncle's footlocker from Vietnam, the one the family had always assumed was lost when he came home. Major sat beside him, panting softly, as if he understood the magnitude of what they discovered. The combination lock looked impossible to crack, but when Marcus tried his uncle's birthday on a whim, it opened with a soft click. The contents took his breath away completely. Wrapped in waterproof material were photographs, letters, military documents, and something that made Marcus's knees buckle. A Purple Heart in its original case, along with a Bronze Star and several other commendations his uncle had never mentioned to the family. But underneath the medals and photographs was something even more extraordinary. A manila envelope marked Harper's Junction Development Confidential contained surveys, geological reports, and correspondence dating back 15 years. The papers detailed oil and mineral rights surveys conducted on the property and surrounding area, identifying what geologists estimated as a $200 million natural gas deposit running directly beneath the station. Marcus spread the documents across the floor, his hands trembling as he read through technical reports and correspondence between his uncle and various energy companies. Major lay down beside him, head resting on his paws, as if he understood this was a moment that required quiet contemplation. According to the papers, William Rodriguez had been approached repeatedly by energy companies wanting to lease or buy the property, but he'd refused every offer, apparently waiting for the right moment or the right person to pass the information to. A handwritten note in his uncle's familiar scrawl was paper clipped to the most recent survey. "For whoever comes after me. Use this wisely. Remember where it came from. Bull Rodriguez, Drive Company, 173rd Airborne." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. His uncle hadn't just left him a broken-down gas station. He'd left him a fortune, along with the responsibility to handle it properly. The geological surveys were recent enough to still be valid, and the mineral rights were clearly delineated as belonging to the property owner. But there was something else in the envelope, something that explained why his uncle had hidden everything behind a false wall. Letters from a local development company, Harper Industries, showed increasingly aggressive attempts to force a sale, including threats of legal action and eminent domain proceedings that William had successfully fought off for over a decade. Major's sudden alertness snapped Marcus back to the present moment. The dog's ears were up, his body focused on sounds Marcus couldn't yet hear. Through the grimy windows of the station, Marcus caught sight of a black sedan pulling into the parking area, moving slowly and deliberately like a predator approaching prey. The car's windows were tinted dark enough to be illegal, and something about its presence made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. Major rose to his feet, positioning himself between Marcus and the front entrance, a low-grow building deep in his chest. The dog's military training was evident in every line of his body as he assessed the potential threat. Two men in expensive suits climbed out of the sedan, their movements too smooth, too coordinated to be casual business visitors. The older man, tall and silver-haired with the kind of tan that came from country club golf courses, surveyed the property with the calculating gaze of someone appraising an acquisition. His younger companion carried a briefcase and had the build of someone who spent more time in gyms than boardrooms. They approached the front door with the confidence of people who were accustomed to getting their way through a combination of money and intimidation. Major's growl deepened, and Marcus felt his own combat instincts stirring for the first time in years. "Mr. Rodriguez." The older man's voice carried through the thin walls as they entered without invitation. "I'm Charles Harper, Harper Industries. This is my associate, Mr. Kellerman. I believe we need to talk about your inheritance." His smile was perfectly practiced and completely empty of warmth. "I'm prepared to make you an offer for this property that will solve all your financial problems. Cash, quick closing, everyone walks away happy." The way he emphasized everyone carried an undertone that suggested not everyone would walk away at all if the offer was refused. Major's hackles rose visibly, and Marcus noticed the dog was focused not on Harper, but on Kellerman, who was examining the building's interior with the attention of someone planning a demolition. Marcus carefully gathered the papers from his uncle's footlocker, keeping his movements casual while his mind raced through possibilities. These men knew something about what lay beneath the property, and their timing was too coincidental to be anything but surveillance-based. They'd probably been watching the station since William's death, waiting to see who would inherit and whether that person would be easier to manipulate than the stubborn old veteran who'd thwarted their plans for 15 years. But they hadn't counted on another veteran, one with a military working dog whose instincts were finely tuned to recognize predators in expensive clothing. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Harper," Marcus replied, rising slowly to his feet while Major maintained his defensive position. "But I'm not interested in selling. This place has sentimental value." The lie came easily, a skill learned in situations where revealing the truth could get you killed. Harper's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, and Kellerman's hand moved inside his jacket in a motion that made Marcus's combat reflexes surge to full alert. Major caught the movement too, his growl becoming audible enough that both visitors took an involuntary step backward. The dog's message was clear. Whatever these men were planning, they'd have to go through him first. "Sentimental value doesn't pay bills, Mr. Rodriguez," Harper said, his voice losing some of its practiced warmth. "A man in your position, with your medical expenses and limited income, might want to reconsider the practical benefits of a generous offer. Sometimes stubbornness can lead to unfortunate complications." The threat was delivered with the same smile, but Major responded by moving forward half a step, positioning himself where he could launch an attack if necessary. The dog's military training was evident in his tactical assessment of the situation, and Marcus realized his four-legged partner was reading the situation more clearly than he was. Kellerman spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. "Nice dog. Military training, from the look of him. Shame when working dogs get too old to be useful. Sometimes they have to be retired." The implied threat against Major crystallized Marcus's decision, making in a way that threats against himself couldn't. Whatever game these men were playing, they just made it personal by threatening his partner. The rage that surged through him was familiar, the same cold fury that had kept him alive in combat situations where thinking too much could get you killed. "Gentleman," Marcus said quietly, his voice taking on the tone that had once commanded respect from soldiers under fire. "I think this conversation is over. My dog doesn't seem to like you very much, and I've learned to trust his judgment about people." Major's tail gave a single approving thump while his eyes remained locked on Kellerman. "You know where the door is." Harper's facade cracked slightly, revealing something harder and more dangerous underneath, but the presence of the obviously protective dog seemed to give both men pause. They weren't prepared for resistance backed up by 60 pounds of trained muscle and teeth. After the men left, their sedan kicking up gravel in what Marcus interpreted as a promise of return, he spent the evening researching Harper Industries online, using the spotty internet connection he'd managed to restore. What he found painted a picture of a development company with a history of acquiring rural properties through a combination of legal pressure and barely legal intimidation tactics. Several former landowners had filed complaints with state agencies about harassment and property damage that mysteriously occurred after they'd refused to sell. The pattern was clear. Harper Industries wanted his land badly enough to break laws to get it. Major seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, staying close to Marcus throughout the night and positioning himself where he could monitor both the front and back entrances to the station. The dog's military instincts were fully engaged, and Marcus found himself grateful for the partnership in a way he hadn't expected. Together, they represented something these corporate predators hadn't anticipated. Two veterans who understood how to fight back against overwhelming odds. The next morning brought reinforcement in the form of Sarah Chen, a lawyer from the County Legal Aid Society who specialized in helping veterans navigate property disputes. Marcus had called her after finding her name in his uncle's papers, along with a note suggesting she could be trusted. Sarah was younger than Marcus had expected, probably mid-30s, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd dealt with bullies like Harper before. Major approved of her immediately, accepting her presence with the calm assessment of a dog who understood that some civilians were allies worth protecting. "Your uncle was a smart man," Sarah said after reviewing the geological surveys and Harper Industries correspondence. "He documented everything, kept copies of every threat, every illegal approach they made. This is enough evidence to bury Harper Industries in federal court, especially with the mineral rights documentation." She gestured to the surveys spread across the makeshift table Marcus had assembled from sawhorses and plywood. "But you need to understand, Mr. Rodriguez, that men like Charles Harper don't give up easily. If legal pressure doesn't work, they tend to escalate to more direct methods." Marcus nodded grimly, his hand automatically moving to scratch behind Major's ears. The dog had positioned himself where he could see both the lawyer and the front entrance, his alert posture indicating he was taking nothing for granted. "There is another option," she said carefully. "We could approach the state attorney general's office with what we have. Environmental protection laws give them authority to investigate Harper Industries' entire operation." The sound of approaching vehicles cut through their discussion like a blade through silk. Major was on his feet before Marcus even registered the noise, his body coiled and ready for action. Through the windows, they could see not just Harper's black sedan, but two additional vehicles. A white van with no markings and a pickup truck carrying what looked like surveying equipment. 6 men total, all wearing the kind of casual clothing that suggested they were comfortable with physical intimidation. Sarah immediately began photographing the vehicles with her phone while Marcus moved to a position where he could see the entire parking area. "Mr. Rodriguez," Harper called out without leaving his vehicle, "we're here to conduct a survey of the property boundaries. Legal right-of-way inspection. You're welcome to observe, but interference with a legitimate survey could result in legal complications." The lie was delivered with practiced confidence, but Marcus could see that none of the men carried legitimate surveying credentials. This was harassment designed to probe their defenses and identify vulnerabilities for future action. Major's assessment was more direct. These men represented a threat that required immediate response. "Sarah, can you call the county sheriff's department?" Marcus asked quietly, never taking his eyes off the vehicles. She was already dialing, her voice steady as she reported the situation to emergency dispatch. Major had moved to the front window, his attention focused specifically on two men who were approaching the building with equipment that looked more like surveillance gear than surveying tools. The dog's instincts were screaming warnings that Marcus's own military experience confirmed. This was reconnaissance for a future assault. The confrontation escalated when Kellerman attempted to attach some kind of device to the station's electrical meter. Major's response was immediate and decisive. He began barking with the deep, authoritative voice of a military working dog detecting contraband or explosives. The sound was designed to alert handlers to significant threats, and its effect on the would-be intruders was immediate. Kellerman jerked backward, nearly dropping the device, while the other men looked uncertainly toward Harper for guidance. They hadn't expected it to face a trained military dog, and their body language revealed they weren't prepared for that level of resistance. "That's an illegal surveillance device," Sarah called out through the window, her phone still recording everything. "Installation of unauthorized electronic monitoring equipment is a federal crime. Gentlemen, I suggest you remove it immediately and leave the property before the authorities arrive." Her legal training was evident in her calm delivery of information that carried serious consequences. Marcus could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer, and Major's barking had attracted the attention of neighboring properties. Harper Industries had underestimated the support network a veteran could mobilize when threatened on his own land. The arrival of two sheriff's deputies changed the dynamic completely. Deputy Marty, a veteran himself, took one look at the situation and immediately understood what was happening. "Mr. Harper, we've received reports of harassment and illegal surveillance activities. I'm going to need to see identification from all your people and documentation for any equipment you've brought onto this property." His hand rested casually near his service weapon, a gesture that wasn't lost on anyone present. Major had stopped barking but remained alert, his presence serving as a reminder that some threats required more than legal responses. Harper's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely under official scrutiny. "This is private business, Deputy. We have legitimate interests in this property that go back years." His voice carried the entitled anger of someone unaccustomed to having his authority challenged by rural law enforcement. "My legal team will be in touch with your department about interference with legitimate business activities." The threat was empty, and everyone present knew it, but it revealed the kind of pressure Harper Industries was prepared to bring to bear against anyone who opposed their plans. Deputy Martinez wasn't impressed. "Sierra, what I see here is 6 men on private property without permission, attempting to install electronic devices without proper authorization. That's trespassing and attempted burglary at minimum." His backup had arrived, and suddenly Harper's people found themselves outnumbered by law enforcement officers who clearly sympathized with the veteran property owner and his protective dog. The aftermath of the confrontation provided Marcus with exactly what he needed: documented evidence of Harper Industries' illegal tactics and official law enforcement recognition of the harassment his family had endured for over a decade. Sarah immediately filed for restraining orders against Harper and his associates while simultaneously petitioning the state attorney general's office to investigate the company's pattern of illegal land acquisition attempts. Major had proved himself invaluable, not just as protection but as a witness whose trained responses to threats provided clear evidence of criminal intent. That evening, as Marcus sat in his uncle's chair reading through more family letters he'd found in the footlocker, Major positioned himself at his feet with the satisfied demeanor of a soldier who'd completed a successful mission. The geological surveys spread across the table represented more than financial security. They represented validation of William Rodriguez's long fight against corporate bullying and confirmation that his faith in family loyalty had been justified. Sarah returned the next day with news that transformed everything. The Attorney General's office is very interested in Harper Industries, she reported, her excitement barely contained. Apparently, your situation is part of a larger pattern they've been investigating for 2 years. Your uncle's documentation provides the missing pieces they needed to build a federal case. She spread additional papers across their makeshift table, revealing a conspiracy that extended far beyond one rural gas station to encompass fraudulent surveys, bribed officials, and systematic intimidation of military veterans and elderly property owners across 3 states. The financial implications were staggering, but Marcus found himself most focused on the vindication his uncle would never live to see. Bull Rodriguez fought them off for 15 years because he knew what they really were. Sarah continued. The geological surveys were his insurance policy, proof that their offers were fraudulent attempts to steal resources worth 200 times what they were willing to pay. Major's tail thumped approvingly against the floor, as if he understood that justice was finally being served. Within 6 months, the investigation Sarah had initiated led to federal indictments against Harper Industries' leadership and the discovery of a criminal enterprise that had stolen millions of dollars worth mineral rights from rural communities across the American Southwest. Marcus's testimony, supported by his uncle's meticulous documentation, became the cornerstone of a prosecution that resulted in prison sentences for Harper and his associates. The restitution payments to victims funded a community development trust that brought responsible economic growth to Harper's Junction for the first time in decades. The natural gas lease Marcus negotiated with a legitimate energy company provided enough income to transform the old station into a community center serving local veterans and their families. Major, now officially retired from active duty but still sharp as ever, became the facility's unofficial mascot and therapy dog, his calm presence helping other veterans work through their own struggles with civilian life. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his uncle's greatest victory had come through partnership with the dog who'd guarded his secrets long after he was gone, waiting for the right person to trust with the truth. Standing in the renovated station on the anniversary of his inheritance, Marcus watched Major supervising a group therapy session with the dignity of a senior officer reviewing troops. The dog had taught him that survival wasn't just about enduring hardship, but about recognizing when to trust the instincts that had kept them alive in impossible situations. Together, they'd honored William Rodriguez's legacy by proving that corporate bullies were no match for veterans who understood the value of loyalty, patience, and strategic thinking honed in the crucible of military service. Have you ever wondered what stories the animals in your life might be trying to tell you? Share your own tales of faithful companions who've made all the difference when it mattered most. The next chapter in our collection reveals how a retired military nurse and her rescue horse uncovered a age-old mystery that changed an entire town's understanding of its own history.